Welcome to my channel, guys. This is MJ Hobby Corner, and in this video I have something a little different that I want to discuss. This is my Cavern project, and as some of you know, I started announcing this project last year around New Year's or so during one of the Martin and Julie chats. And what you see here is actually a picture of the Cavern terrain using molten plastic bags, and this actually worked very well, and I really liked it. It's very sturdy, and just add a few things like craft sand, and I add a little bit of tinfoil in order to make the stalagmites and stalactites, and it worked really well. The thing is, I've been wanting to have a game where we tell a story beneath the ground, basically. Use underground races like dark elves and just tell a good story, right? So that was the purpose behind this project. And here you could see one of the molten plastic pieces with some gems that I found, and I just embedded them into the terrain, and it looks really good. So I had that technique, and then I had my old tinfoil technique, and that's what you're seeing here. These were terrain pieces, about 13 terrain pieces that I made, and they're about a year old, a little over a year, I think, and it's all done with tinfoil. Tinfoil, inside of it, of course, there is a foam skeleton with dowels and things like that, so it's very strong. The only thing is the skin, which is tinfoil, but inside there's a whole skeleton, a whole armature. Now, tinfoil, I've used tinfoil for a variety of things. I sculpture with it, and this is an example of an Oathmark boat that I made for one of our river battles, and it's being pulled by two skeletal snakes, and this I did on the fly. It was like a 30-minute project, and I attached the boat to the snakes, and it was really cool. And then I also sculpture with tinfoil, so I've done, like, this is an Allosaurus. It's about 5 to 6 years old. That's like a 6-year-old sculpture, and that's tinfoil. There is wire inside of it, of course. There's a wire skeleton and all that, and I've made dinosaur skeletons and all this other stuff with tinfoil. So I know how to work with tinfoil. I know how to preserve it. And I started making ruined buildings out of tinfoil. But tinfoil has its limitations, and especially with the buildings, while I've used this kind of terrain in many of our Oathmark battles, it didn't quite fit with a lot of the ruined terrain that I have. And so, believe it or not, I was going to discard a lot of this tinfoil terrain. It would have been 13 pieces of tinfoil terrain that were going to be purged, taken out of the studio forever. And I decided not to, and you'll see why as the video goes on. So I'm a very kind of traditional gamer, old-time gamer. I still use my books under a cloth, and I make my own cloth mats that I use in my games, and you guys are probably very familiar with this. And I just love that technique. You know, it's such an old technique, but I love it. And here is one of the mats, one of the sheets that I have, and I texture it and I paint it, and I have this whole procedure for making these sheets, and they've treated me very well. We've had a lot of very fun games on this kind of technique. So for my caverns, I thought that this would be a technique for the base of the cavern that I would use. Now, naturally, I secure my mats, and this is a picture showing one of the alligator clips that I use, and there's several all around the table, and this secures the mat so that it doesn't move around when we're moving figures and everything else. It's very important for this technique. And so I have this old technique, and I'm thinking, well, if I don't want to use the mats in some of these cavern games, whatever it is that we decide in the future, I always have my chipboard terrain that I made. And here is an example of it. You know, it's more traditional kind of chipboard and hardboard, and then all of this like craft sand and all that. But the real point of this video, and here it is, it's the sort of realization, the epiphany that I had when I was going to throw away this tinfoil terrain. What I discovered was that if I took individual pieces of my tinfoil terrain and actually inverted them over some of the larger pieces of tinfoil terrain, and then added some dowels as support and literally embed them into the tinfoil terrain piece, I could make some really intricate caverns. And the top portion of this terrain then acts as a platform, and I can add more terrain and actually have a cavern that is multiple stories. You know, and that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted a cavern that would have vertical height as well as some horizontal height. And actually these tables would be small. Most of the play area would be vertical height. So this way I can use all those climbing rules and jumping rules and pushing people over ledges, you know, all that good fun stuff. So that made me realize that no, I can't throw this terrain away. And I mean, this terrain was with me, as I said, for about a year or more, a little bit over a year. And I have videos on how I made all this tinfoil terrain. And now, if I modify it a little bit, I can actually have the caverns that I wanted and not have to invest so much time into a whole new project. And so mixing this with the plastic bag technique and these little cardboard platforms that you see there, I did cut out quite a few cardboard platforms, and you'll see how they work to really enhance the cavern, the whole idea of vertical depth to the cavern, right? And that's what I wanted, the layers that are close to the surface and then the deep layers of the cavern. And here you see in this video how I'm using those little cardboard cutouts, and they have to be, you know, I have to turn those into rock. Those dowels as well, you won't see dowels, they're going to be turned into rock. But it's an example of how I can create the cavern. Now here I add all kinds of little pieces of scatter terrain that I had, including these clay mushrooms that, you know, when you have a large terrain collection, you forget what you have. These crystals that I made out of plastic bottles that would work great inside of a cavern terrain, right? All of this scatter terrain can go on the platforms, really adorn it, and look at all the intricate layers and levels to this terrain, to this table. I was able to set up 6 or 7 different kinds of setups in about a half hour just by inverting my tinfoil terrain pieces and then using my old school kind of book under the sheet technique and making different elevations and such and putting the terrain over those elevations. Now the important thing is to see how models interact. And that's what I'm doing here. Basically putting the models. This is a Reaper model and it's very heavy because I put it on a washer. So it's the perfect test to see whether these pieces are stable. You know, if this stuff collapses, then I know, oh, well, that doesn't work. But look at all the intricate, and I can add rivers down below. I can add a dark sheet, like a black sheet, and turn it into an abyssal zone. So anyone that falls, they're gone. You know, and if I have water under there, I could have some kind of water beast under there lurking. So anything that falls, that's the end of it. So I used the Seraphon and kind of experimented with the platforms, and I would add a few more like connection pieces so that models can get from one place to the other. Even teleportation pieces that would teleport a model from one platform to the other. All of that works in fantasy. So here is a view of the cavern material. And again, you can see how intricate it is. And what I have to do now is really work on those dowels. And you can see some of my clothespins there. I use clothespins in a variety of different ways. And if I camouflage them right, they can be used to actually hold those platforms from underneath. Some of those things will be glued, but a majority of them will not, because they are modular. So I already have a technique in mind for making this multi-level piece. And again, this is using terrain that I already had that I was going to throw away. So that's the big moral here, is don't throw away your stuff until you know, right, that it's not useful. Here is a dark elf queen in her habitat, commanding those giant spiders. I don't like to base my spiders because, especially in this terrain, this is a clear example of how the spiders work best without bases. They just cling on to the terrain, and some of those spiders are magnetized, and they can actually, I can have some magnetic walls, cave walls, where these spiders can actually go up. So that's pretty cool. So I don't base them because, again, they're just a lot easier to move around in terrain like this. Some of these spiders are sculpted, like I sculpted the abdomen of the spider. You're going to see that in just a bit. I used dollar store spiders that I bought for Halloween. They were like these little glow-in-the-dark rings, and that's how I made these spiders there. There is one of them that's a D&D spider, right, from the D&D line. I think it was the Pathfinder line, but the rest, a lot of them were sculpted by me. Here's another example. You can see the stalagmites, stalactites, I believe, are the ones coming down. Yeah, I got to get those two, clear in my head. But here's another view, and you can see that sort of cavern stairwell that I made. And again, that bottom will be filled with loose stones and things like that, and it's just going to decorate it and make it a little more interesting. But here is a view of the system of dowels that I just made up, puncturing the tinfoil terrain and all the foam that's in there, and some of the dowels that are in that terrain, to make it nice and sturdy. So I'll be working on that. Now this is an example of foam rocks that I made, and why I'm showing this is that this is the way, since I used that book under the sheets technique, I actually use these pieces to adorn the hillsides so that you're not always seeing the sheet. And that's what I'm showing you here. So for the cavern terrain, I would do pieces like this that would hide the kind of the elevations of the sheets, so you wouldn't always see that. I also use clip-on terrain with that I've made with clothespins, and this is an example of my coral terrain. That's what I used in my coral reefs to decorate the sides of the reef, so that you wouldn't just see a plain sheet, with the books under it. So I can do that, but with mushrooms or a whole swarm of spiders or something like that, or bats hanging upside down, and I can just clip them to one of these platforms, and there I have an interesting piece of terrain, of scatter terrain. And see, so that's what I'm showing you here. But this is my coral clip-on terrain. So I'm going to be inventing some cavern clip-on terrain, which will work for this. And I can clip them on anything, So creepy crawlers. So cavern terrain is going to have a lot of creepy crawlers, and that's an example of these spider rings that I use. And then I just sculpt the bodies of the spiders, and there's a wolf spider that I made using that technique, using green stuff, and I just redo the bodies and redo some of the legs, and I have a good looking spider. Okay, you see that with that red spider there in the video, the one with the red markings. So that was a sculpted spider. So the scaled ones, one of the cool things is that now by inverting my tinfoil terrain, putting one on top of the other, I have all these nooks and crannies that suddenly stand out. And here's an example of a lizard man there. I could maybe have with a bow or with a crossbow, and you know, sniper kind of thing. And here's an example of another lizard man, but you see how the terrain is stacked up one on top of the other, and now all I have to do is make sure that those bases are decorated so that the terrain is actually you can use it both ways. So basically, if I want to invert it like this, I gotta decorate the top of the bases so that they look like cavern platforms basically. And of course those dowels have to be worked on and turned into rock. But there you see like a 3 or 4 story cavern terrain. And again, this is all, and there's the tin cans that I plan to use to make a large column of rock that's going to support a platform. So you have all these platforms, and I can connect them with different ways, or models may have to jump and risk it, or you know, just things like that. I mean, this is actually quite a big board. We wouldn't play on something this big, to be honest. So I mean, there's just, again, this was a total epiphany, because all of that tinfoil terrain would be gone. I would have purged it. So Underworld Ruins, and this is an example of the tinfoil terrain that I made, the buildings that weren't quite fitting, right? Well, they fit perfectly in this underground world, because we can say that whoever created those ruins just carved the cave. You know, made the buildings right out of the cave wall. And so I can place these ruins right on the platforms that I just made, the new platforms. And there you go. You have these ruined structure that kind of blend in with the whole cave thing. And so it could be a dark elf ruin. It could be a dwarven ruin. I can maybe decorate it a little bit more with runes and things like that. My tinfoil mushrooms. Giant tinfoil mushrooms. Go figure. They fit nicely in this kind of terrain. And I can make more of them and more shapes. We can have a nice kind of mushroom forest, maybe a dangerous forest, right? And those mushrooms actually have tentacles. They probably do something to you. And you know, so this is another setup. All these different little clips are different setups that I did with all this terrain. So thank you for watching, guys, and that's the end of this presentation. I hope you like it, and next week that's what I'm going to be doing. You should see a video or two on this process.